Now, Brittany has no surviving vernacular literature to any extent, but the Latin lives of some saints contain elements from earlier sources. And the 11th century tale of this 7th century warrior saint Eudecael recounts the youthful vision of his father, Eudael, who dreams that he was seated on an ivory chair on the summit of a mountain in the middle of his kingdom, and nearby a great tree stretched from the earth to the heavens, and a beautiful virgin named Pritel appears, whose physical union with him brings prosperity to him and to his kingdom, and who produces a child who will, of course, become the saint. The account is a fairly long one, and I won't go through it, but in this dream, he sees a most lofty mountain, as you can see, standing in the middle of the kingdom, at its very center, and this central point is important. And when this woman approaches him, she greets him and says, "Hail, Lord Eudael." And then turning to look at her, he says, "Girl, what are you doing here?" She answered him, "My king Eudael, in some manner it has been foreordained by our Maker that you and I should come to this place, and that the custody of this great pillar should be handed on for a time from no man in the world but yourself to no woman but myself." It was Princess Macanna who noted the profound significance of the themes here. You have the conjoined core themes of Axis Mundi, the great pillar, and the sovereignty figure in the form of the young girl. And this union of Eudael and Pritel had obvious echoes of the marriage between king and goddess, here placed very dramatically at the center of the kingdom. I doubt if, well, perhaps closer to home, another scholar, Jan de Vries, once thought that the legend of Amleth, Prince of Denmark, recounted in the history of the Danes of Saxo Grammaticus, might be an allusion to this sort of regal union. Hermintrude, Queen of Scotland, accepts the fortunate Amleth as king, for, to quote, "whatever man she honoured with her bed was actually king, and received a realm and her caresses together." Now, like that story of the Thane of Cawdor and the foundation of Cawdor Castle, which I mentioned, and which, one seemed to have some doubts about, it is rather interesting that there should be two Scottish legends that might be much reduced memories of ancient rights of kingship in this part of the world. However, to return to archaeological evidence and this surer ground that I mentioned, I hope, there's no shortage of archaeological evidence for drinking rituals of one sort or another in European prehistory. Even though the linking of the archaeology of intoxication with goddess figures is a difficult task. Miranda Green, who has done much study in this field, has suggested that a relief of a divine couple from Pagny-la-Ville near Beaune in Burgundy might be a representation of this offering a drink. The older bearded man is bearing a hammer in his left hand, and there's a large vessel on his right. It could be, I suppose, a representation of the ceremonial offering of a drink by a goddess to a king. But then there are real interpretative difficulties here. Miranda Green also suggests that an image now in the Museum at Devizes in Wiltshire, showing a woman apparently holding a cup or a bowl to a male partner, may depict a similar act. Dumézil, it would be remembered, compared Maeve and Madaffi and was impressed by this parallelism between ancient India and early Ireland and the perspective it offered on Indo-European kingship. I think here we may actually get a glimpse of a widespread ritual in which authority, such as sacral kingship, was affirmed by the offering of a drink by a woman of special status. This theme has been explored by Michael Enright in his book with the memorable title, Lady with a Mead Cup. And in this work, he examined the literary evidence for the role of women in liquor service in the Germanic world from the 1st to the 9th centuries AD. And he identified an archaic rite in which the lordship of a man was acknowledged by a woman who had a pivotal role in a service ritual that confirmed him basically as lord or as leader of a war band. And in his study, he instances a grave at Welling and the Danish island of Lolland, dated to about AD 100. This was found in the early 20th century during the construction of a railway. And it's the burial of a woman, and now I think in the museum in Copenhagen, who was buried with exceptionally rich grave goods. And the accompanying artifacts included, as you can see, Roman imports and personal ornaments. And drinking utensils were a noteworthy feature of the contents. It comprised a bronze Roman cauldron, a ladle, a wine strainer placed in her right hand, and 2 very fine glass beakers and 2 drinking horns. The bronze cauldron had once contained a drink brewed from barley, cranberry, and bog myrtle, and the pieces of food had also been placed in the grave. And Enright rightly considers her to have been a high-status woman who had a respective role as a distributor of drink. And in fact, at the very beginning of Irish pseudo-history, in the book of invasions, the Lower Gabhála, when the sons of Meath, the mythical ancestors of the Gaelic Irish, defeat the gods of those 2 Donnan whom we've met, they encounter 3 goddesses, Banba, Fola, and Eru, and they meet at Uisneach in the very centre of Ireland, and Eru gives her name to the island as a whole. Other goddesses like Mev or Macha may have more provincial connotations, but all of these instances are examples of land and sovereignty conceived as a female divinity, and one intimately linked to the institution of sacral kingship. The concept that a king was wedded to his territory is literally as old as the history of the island. And it actually continues as a well-known metaphor in later literature. It's found, for example, in Jacobite poetry as well. I wonder if such feminine imagery should retain its force in historical times for well over a millennium. It would not be surprising to expect an even longer ancestry in the supernatural order of those prehistoric Indo-European peoples, where tribal, rural societies of this sort were the norm. Now, obviously, archaeological evidence for the goddess of the land is difficult, if not impossible, to identify. And I'm not too happy about pursuing this particular theme. But the prehistoric worldview probably did conceptualize the earth as a female entity and saw some of the interactions with it in terms of, a sexual encounter between a man and a woman. And if you think about it, land winning, taking possession of the land, ploughing a furrow, penetrating the land, inserting a pillar stone, are just some of these actions replete with this sort of imagery. However, the Mev we're encountering with our ancient, possibly Indo-European dimension, serves to remind us that where her name is attached to landscape features, particularly in some fashion that reflects her fertility aspects, we may be conceivably looking at some very ancient motifs indeed. It's interesting that the place name scholar Kay Muir has studied the various locations, mainly in the northern half of the island of Ireland, where the name of Mev is found in place names. Of course, it occurs attached to hilltop cairns like that well-known cairn on Knocknarea in Sligo, and indeed to prehistoric cairns and other mountaintops in Donegal as well. But these are very sort of general associations. In one or two instances noted by Kay Muir, however, we have a more explicit reference to perhaps the fertility aspect of the goddess. The name of Sowell Mountain on the borders of counties Tyrone and Derry, for example, was recorded as Mullach na Sowla, the hilltop of the likeness, in the early 17th century. And there's a feature on the side of the mountain, briefly noted by the Ordnance Survey, called Sowell Fitta Meva, and the name appears as Sowell Pitta Mew, as you can see marked on the ancient map there. Now, what precisely was the likeness of Maeve's vulva is not stated, but Kay Muir makes the interesting suggestion that there may have been a mountain stream rising high up between Sowell and a neighbouring mountain and it's one that flows across a grassy shelf called Uchtmama, and she suggests the name might mean Maeve's front. And Muir also notes a townland in County Antrim with the same anatomical reference. In this case, it may have been a megalithic tomb. Moving on to Tara, Conor Newman has also taken a look at the relationship of the name of Mev with that landscape, because remembering that Mev too has some equine associations which we won't pursue just now, it does seem likely that a sovereignty goddess, again with equine associations, the personification of the white mare, that was such a feature of the inauguration rituals in the last lecture. Conor Newman has suggested that such a personage probably guaranteed the activities at Tara. And the name of Tara's goddess is linked to one monument, Rath Maeve, to the west of the hill of Tara. I've marked it there with a star. But what's more interesting in the Tara landscape and the sort of anatomical references we've been looking at is the fact that the Nith River, now virtually no more, which you see marked in the very centre of the schematic map on the right, this issues from a well on the hill of Tara, the well of Nemnach. And Conor Newman, in his study of the landscape there, suggests that it was an important feature in the sacralized landscape because its waters emanated from Tara, literally from the body of the goddess herself. The Neath River joins the Gowra River, which flows past Rathlew, now flanked by a certain motorway. And the course of both rivers, the Neath and the Gowra, is marked by important monuments. The etymology of Neath is very obscure, but it has been suggested that it may too have Indo-European roots. The name of the Gowra River is clear, however. It's the river of the white mare. And once again, we come across these equine associations in the imagery. It was a sacred river and a key component in the sacral landscape, flowing as it does between the hills of Tara and Skreen. The neighbouring hill to Tara, the hill of Skreen, is a place to which a blemished king could be banished, and we'll come across this motif later on. It was, if you like, the cosmographical counterpoint of Tara. And these two monuments in the Tara landscape, the hill itself and the hill of Skreen, are effectively linked by the waters of the sovereignty goddess, the Gowra River that flows between them. The name Gabor, Old Irish, white horse, is, it's interesting to note, incorporated in other place names as well. It's associated with royal sites such as the famous royal lake-dwelling Cronog of Lagor, the settlement of the medieval kings of Brega, a mere 7 kilometres from the hill of Tara. The lake is known in Irish as the Lake of the White Mare. And Elizabeth Fitzpatrick has identified another fascinating medieval allusion to the White Mare in County Fermanagh. Here, not far from the small town of Lisnaskea, there's a hilltop enclosure and a mound that was part of the inauguration landscape of the Maguire lordship. And here we find actually one of the medieval allusions to the right of the single shoe that perhaps brings us close to Scotland in the representation there at Dunad, but that's another matter. Succession to the lordship of the Maguires was contested in the 16th century, and one unsuccessful claimant tellingly left a single shoe on the mound. It was a symbolic act, heavy indeed with significance. The hilltop enclosure studied by Liz Fitzpatrick is called the Skia Gowra, the shield of the white mare. And the mound itself is C1 on the top left of the illustration that you see, and it's surrounded by a great oval enclosure marked as C3. And it seems as if this sort of enclosing element, this rampart surrounding the otherworld mound, is the shield or the buckler of the otherworld mound associated with the goddess of sovereignty, this horsey personification. And as Liz Fitzpatrick points out, this is one of these landscapes, once again, that has a long pedigree, a long biography, because there are several other prehistoric mounds in the immediate vicinity, some of them probably of Bronze Age or even older date. And its medieval usage is probably simply one of the later manifestations of the sanctity of this particular location.